Tuck Everlasting by Natalie Babbitt. Chapters 11, 12, and 13, read aloud by Mrs. Chavez. Vocabulary. Number 1, decisively, unquestionably. 2, silty, sandy. Chapter 11. It was a good supper. Flapjacks, bacon, bread, and applesauce. But they ate sitting about in the parlor instead of around a table. Winnie had never had a meal that way before, and she watched them carefully at first to see what rules there might be that she did not know about. But there seemed to be no rules. Jessie sat on the floor and used the seat of a chair for a table, but the others held their plates in their laps. There were no napkins. It was all right, then, to lick the maple syrup from your fingers. Winnie was never allowed to do such a thing at home, but she had always thought that it would be the easiest way, and suddenly the meal seemed luxurious. After a few minutes, however, it was clear to Winnie that there was at least one rule. As long as there was food to eat, there was no conversation. All 4 Tucks kept their eyes and their attention on the business at hand, and in the silence given time to think, Winnie felt her elation and her thoughtless pleasure wobble and collapse. It had been different when they were out of doors, where the world belonged to everyone and no one. Here, everything was theirs alone. Everything was done their way. Eating, she realized now, was a very personal thing, not something to do with strangers. Chewing was a personal thing, yet here she was, chewing with strangers in a strange place. She shivered a little and frowned, looking around at them. That story they had told her. Why, they were crazy, she thought harshly, and they were criminals. They had kidnapped her right out of the middle of her very own wood, and now she would be expected to sleep all night in this dirty, peculiar house. She had never slept in any bed but her own in her life. All these thoughts flowed at once from the dark part of her mind. She put down her fork and said unsteadily, "I want to go home." The Tucks stopped eating and looked at her, surprised. May said soothingly, "Why, of course you do, child. That's only natural. I'll take you home, as I promised I would. Soon's we've explained a bit as to why, you've got to promise you'll never tell about the spring. That's the only reason why we run you here. We got to make you see why." Then Miles said cheerfully and with sudden sympathy, "There's a pretty good old rowboat. I'll take you out for a row after supper." "No, I will," said Jessie. "Let me. I found her first, didn't I, Winnie Foster? Listen, I'll show you where the frogs are in." "Hush," Tuck interrupted. "Everyone hush. I'll take Winnie rowing on the pond." "There's a good deal to be said, and I think we better hurry up and say it. I got a feeling there ain't a whole lot of time." Jessie laughed at this and ran a hand roughly through his curls. "That's funny, Pa. Seems to me like time's the only thing we got a lot of." But May frowned. "You worried, Tuck? What's got you? No one saw us on the way up." "Well, now, wait a bit. Yes, they did, come to think of it. There was a man on the road just outside Tree Gap, but he didn't say nothing." "He knows me, though," said Winnie. She had forgotten, too, about the man in the yellow suit, and now, thinking of him, she felt a surge of relief. "He'll tell my father he saw me." "He knows you?" said May, her frown deepening. "But you didn't call out to him, child. Why not?" "I was too scared to do anything," said Winnie, honestly. Tuck shook his head. "I never thought we'd come to a place where we'd be scaring children." He said, "I guess there's no way to make it up to you, Winnie, but I'm sure, most awful sorry, it had to happen like that. Who was the man you saw?" "I don't know his name," said Winnie, "but he's a pretty nice man, I guess. In fact, he seemed supremely nice to her now, a kind of savior." And then she added, "He came to our house last night, but he didn't go inside." "Well, that don't sound too serious, Pa," said Miles. "Just some stranger passing by." "Just the same, we got to get you home again, Winnie," said Tuck, standing up decisively. "We got to get you home just as fast as we can. I got a feeling this whole thing is going to come apart like wet bread. But first, we got to talk, and the pond's the best place. The pond's got answers. Come along, child. Let's go out on the water." Chapter 12. The sky was a ragged blaze of red and pink and orange, and its double trembled on the surface of the pond like color spilled from a paint box. The sun was dropping fast now, a soft red, sliding egg yolk, and already to the east there was a darkening to purple. Winnie, newly brave with her thoughts of being rescued, climbed boldly into the rowboat. The hard heels of her buttoned boots made a hollow banging sound against its wet boards, loud in the warm and breathless quiet. Across the pond a bullfrog spoke, a deep note of warning. Tuck climbed in, too, pushing off and setting the oars into their locks, dipped them into the silty bottom of one strong pull. The rowboat slipped from the bank then, silently, and glided out, tall water grasses whispering away from its sides, releasing it. Here and there the still surface of the water dimpled, the bright rings spread noisily and vanished. "Feeding time," said Tuck softly, and Winnie looked down, saw a host of tiny insects skittering and skating on the surface. "Best time of all for fishing," he said, "when they come up to feed." He dragged on the oars, the rowboat slowed and began to drift gently toward the farthest end of the pond. It was so quiet that Winnie almost jumped when the bullfrog spoke again, and then, from the tall pines and birches that ringed the pond, a wood thrush caroled. The silver notes were pure and clear and lovely. "Know what that is all around us, Winnie?" said Tuck, his voice low. "Life. Moving, growing, changing, never the same 2 minutes together. This water you look at it every morning, and it looks the same, but it ain't. All night long it's been moving, coming in through the stream back there to the west, slipping out through the stream down east here, always quiet, always new, moving on. You can't hardly see the current, can you? And sometimes the wind makes it look like it's going the other way, but it's always there. The water's always moving on, and someday after a while, it comes to the ocean." They drifted in silence for a long time. The bullfrog spoke again, and from behind them, far back in some reedy secret place, another bullfrog answered. The fading light, the trees along the banks were slowly losing their dimensions, flattening into silhouettes, clipped from black paper and pasted to the paling sky. The voice of a different frog, hoarser and not so deep, croaked from the nearest bank. "Know what happens then?" said Tuck. "To the water? The sun sucks some of it up right out of the ocean and carries it back in clouds, and then it rains and falls into the stream, and the stream keeps moving on, taking it all back again. It's a wheel, Winnie. Everything's a wheel, turning and turning, never stopping. The frogs is part of it, the bugs, the fish, and the thrush, too, and people, but never the same ones, always coming in, always growing and changing, and always moving on. That's the way it's supposed to be. That's the way it is." The rowboat had drifted at last to the end of the pond, but now its bow bumped into the rotting branches of a fallen tree that thrust thick fingers into the water, and though the current pulled at it, dragging its stern sideways, the boat was wedged and could not follow. The water slipped past it, out between clumps of reeds and brambles, and gurgled down a narrow bed, over stones and pebbles, foaming a little, moving swiftly now after its slow trip between the pond's wide banks. And farther down, Winnie could see that it hurried into a curve around a leaning willow and disappeared. "It goes on," Tuck repeated, "to the ocean. But this rowboat now, it's stuck. If we didn't move it out ourselves, it would stay here forever, trying to get loose, but stuck. That's what us Tucks are, Winnie. Stuck, so we can't move on. We ain't part of the wheel no more. Dropped off, Winnie, left behind. And everywhere around us things is moving and growing and changing. You, for instance, a child now, but someday a woman. And after that, moving on to make room for the new children." Winnie blinked, and all at once her mind was drowned with understanding of what he was saying. For she, yes, even she would go out of the world willy-nilly someday. Just go out like the flame of a candle, and no use protesting. It was a certainty. She would try very hard not to think of it, but sometimes, as now, it would be forced upon her. She raged against it, helpless and insulted, and blurted at last, "I don't want to die." "No," said Tuck calmly, "not now. Your time's not now. But dying's part of the wheel, right there, next to being born. You can't pick out the pieces you like and leave the rest. Being part of the whole thing, that's the blessing. But it's passing us by, us Tucks. Living's heavy work, but off to one side. The way we are, it's useless too. It don't make sense. If I'd known how to climb back on the wheel, I'd do it in a minute. You can't have living without dying. So you can't call it living what we got. We just are. We just be, like rocks beside the road. Tuck's voice was rough now, and Winnie, amazed, sat rigid. No one had ever talked to her of things like this before. "I want to grow again," he said fiercely, "and change. And if that means I got to move on at the end of it, then I want that too. Listen, Winnie, it's something you don't find out how you feel until afterwards. If people known about the spring down there in Tree Gap, they'd all come running like pigs to slops. They'd trample over each other trying to get some of that water. That'd be bad enough, but afterwards, can you imagine? All the little ones little forever, all the old ones old forever. Can you picture what that means? Forever? The wheel would keep on going round and round, the water rolling by to the ocean, but the people would have turned into nothing but rocks by the side of the road, 'cause they wouldn't know till after, and then it'd be too late." He peered at her, and Winnie saw that his face was pinched with the effort of explaining. "Do you see now, child? Do you understand?" "Oh, Lord, I just got to make you understand." There was a long, long moment of silence. Winnie, struggling with the anguish of all these things, could only sit hunched and numb, the sound of the water rolling in her ears. It was black and silky now. It lapped at the sides of the rowboat and hurried on around them into the stream. And then, down the length of the pond, a voice rang out. It was Miles, and every word across the water claimed clearly to their ears. "Pa! Pa! Come back! Something's happened, Pa! The horse is gone! Can you hear me? Someone stole the horse!" Then he knocked at the door. It was opened at once by Winnie's grandmother, and before she could speak, the man said quickly, "Ah, good evening. May I come in? I have happy news for you. I know where they've taken the little girl." Chapter 13. Sometime later, the man in the yellow suit slipped down from the saddle and tied the Tuck's old horse to a bar of the Foster's fence. He tried the gate. It was unlocked. He pushed through and strode up the path to the door of the cottage. Though it was very late now, almost midnight, the windows glowed golden. The family had not gone to bed. The man in the yellow suit took off his hat and smoothed his hair with long white fingers. Then he knocked at the door. It was opened at once by Winnie's grandmother, and before she could speak, the man said quickly, "Ah, good evening. May I come in? I have happy news for you. I know where they've taken the little girl." Questions. Number 1. Who has the Tuck's horse in Chapter 13? 2. If you could live forever, what age would you be and why? 3. What do you predict will happen next?